Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening as we share our thoughts and views and decode the recently presented Union Budget 2024. I'm just going to quickly introduce the panelists. We have Ashish Dave from Mirae. Hopefully, we are getting Gaurav Kushwaha joining us soon from BlueStone. We have Jayashree Easwaran from Lightrock, Mayank Gupta from Matrix, also now known as Z47, Meeta Aggarwal from United Breweries, Rajesh Yabaji from BlackBuck, Sandhya, Sriram from Narayana Health, and my very own Amithraj and Pankaj Aggarwal. Thank you all for making the time to join us this evening. I'm just going to go first, take the privilege of being the moderator and just share a couple of my thoughts on the budget. And after that, would sort of love to get each of yours. To me, the big takeaway, both a little bit worrying and also a little bit encouraging, is the growth target, actually, which came not today, but in the economic survey yesterday of 7%. The RBI had actually predicted a much higher growth rate, but we cannot really afford to fall below 7. So I was somewhat heartened to see that we're still talking about a 7% growth rate. The other thing which really gave me confidence in this morning's budget was the proposal to reduce the customs duty on parts of phones and even on chargers and full phones. I think India has now finally made a mark as an exporter of phones, and even the domestic consumption is so high. It's now replaced South Korea as the fifth largest manufacturing economy in the world. So I think this change is not specific just to mobile phones, but a symbolic change to say that India is now confident of allowing imports because its own manufacturing base is reasonably strong. The China plus one story, a little confused with the comments in the survey yesterday in terms of India wanting to integrate into the Chinese supply chain, and also the fact that we should encourage FDI from China. Of course, I don't believe in having tariff and trade barriers, but a little unsure of what the government's messaging around partnering and increasing trade with China is going to be. And finally, on the survey, again, one important point which I hope the government can walk the talk on is less governance and allowing the private sector to take more decisions on investment and outcomes. Clearly, from a tax perspective, some of the changes in terms of capital gains and securities transaction tax, I think there is a view that that was done to cool down both the real estate and the stock markets. Would love to get your views. I know we talk a lot about that. And of course, the one somewhat miss, I would say, from a tax perspective is given all the global chatter on, what some of you may have been hearing on the global minimum tax and pillar 2, etc., the speech was completely silent. And other than one part of the equalization levy being abolished, there was really nothing in the budget fine print in terms of moving towards some of the global measures on tax rationalization. And lastly, while I think the 9 themes, this government is known to come up with speeches with themes, but I just feel 9 themes is a bit too much. I think we lose focus. And if I had to just pick one of those 9, I think the emphasis on research and development is a refreshing one, because all the others, at least, have been talked about, but the big one on R&D is certainly very welcome. So with that, maybe just sort of going one by one, Ashish, if I can start with you, just your opening comments on the budget and the economic scenario in general.
Sure, thank you, and welcome everyone. Good evening. So, key takeaways, I think, 100 marks, to the government, or full marks to the government for the fiscal discipline. You have to look at it in the context of the global backdrop in terms of what's happening globally in terms of elections, and there's always political aspect around it. They've managed to not dole out too many freebies, not be too populist, maintaining the fiscal discipline target. I think for me that is a big takeaway, which I would say it's a very courageous decision. That's important because I think we're at the cusp of that rating upgrade, right? And it's important to do that. Also, the global macro situations have not eased, so there is no need to be too adventurous and go that down the road where you lose the discipline, right? And ensure that we are on the growth track, but at the same time not compromising on growth, where I think good amount of investments have been planned for infra, planned for for me the other thing is employee linked incentives, right? PLI, then there's ELI. I think those few ideas are very interesting. So I think overall, it's a very positive budget. On the tax piece, see, I think, there's been a lot of chatter. See, I think investors come into an emerging market for gains. So I think the tax is going to be on gains, not on the losses. So, which I think they're generally very comfortable with. So I don't think investors do have a big concern. Of course, it's better that if it was 10%, but doesn't really worry them too much, because if they look at from a long-term perspective for the next 15-20 years, I think it's not a big thing. So overall, positive.
Thanks, Ashish. Gaurav, thanks. Welcome to the panel. I just request you to share your opening thoughts, please.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. So, I think pertinent was a few things, and I think one of the things specific to jewelry sector is the custom duty on gold and silver. So I think that has been dropped from 15% to 6%. I think over time it has increased significantly to rein in the current account deficit and to kind of to control the demand of gold, because Indians actually buy a lot of gold. So I think that has come down. Bringing that down is actually going to help reduce smuggling of the gold also. So unofficial channels also. So gold coming from unofficial channels should go down significantly. It was, I think, around 10 years back, the duty was around 1 or 2%, and at that time smuggling was almost non-existent. So I think that should that's a very positive step.
Thanks, Gaurav. Jayashree, if I could request you to share your opening thoughts on the budget, please.
Yeah, so since everybody will be, sharing, their views on the budget, and we are going to be decoding the budget, in the rest of our session, I thought I'll just talk a little, spend a minute or so on talking about the survey, the economic survey, which was, tabled yesterday. So obviously, the growth story, it seems to be on track, and there is focus on increasing jobs, which is very critical. The increasing adoption of AI is definitely going to cause employment disruptions, and one has to constantly upskill and reskill themselves, and this has to be addressed at a national level. And today we face a significant challenge in generating job opportunities in the non-farm sector. One thing that I kind of, read, and I was quite surprised, and it is interesting for me as a fitness enthusiast, was the rising obesity emerging as a serious concern among Indian adult population, and the need to take preventive measures for a healthier lifestyle. At least before this, I have never seen this come in the economic survey. Then, of course, bolstering India's MSME sector, and then on the India has made commendable strides towards green energy transition. And as you know, India's energy demand is expected to double by 2047, diversifying into nuclear, biofuels, hydrogen, coupled with bridging the financial shortfall, is crucial for sustaining the momentum. The PLI scheme has, not only increased investment, but also has created substantial employment opportunities. And of course, in the budget, we saw employment-linked incentives as well being announced. So overall, in the medium to long term, the pace of the private sector activity levels, I think, need to increase. And we need to see more people taking up entrepreneurship, as a legitimate option. We will talk. I'll address about the budget in the next few, minutes that we'll spend on that.
Thanks a lot, Jayashree. That was very helpful. I think, as I also mentioned, the economic survey sometimes feels more encouraging than the actual budget speech.
Very true.
You've rightly picked some of the key pointers from there. Mayank, if I can bring you in, please, for your opening thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Abhishek. I think overall, very balanced budget. I think the number one thing I picked up is the fiscal prudence, getting fiscal deficit below 5% and even targeting almost 4.5% for next financial year. I think that's very commendable. And while investing still 11 lakh crores for capex, 2 lakh crores for job building, so I think those are very, very good steps. Overall, I think budget has given something to everybody. So I think it's got the FM is trying to balance a lot of perspective. The only one comment I will make is on the long-term capital gain tax. I think while there's a lot of chatter since morning around increasing it to 12.5%, I think at the stage where India is, where there's a lot of requirement of long-term capital for nation building. I think how much country will gain by adding, another 2%, 2.5% tax. I think that's something could have been relooked at it because it's getting more chatter than how much money we'll gain, as probably as government or as country. Otherwise, it's a very balanced budget. I think congratulations to the government.
Thanks, Mayank. Meeta, if you could come in, please, with your opening thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Abhishek. I think I agree with Mayank. It's a balanced budget. Whilst 9 is a bit too much, but I think at least there are clear priorities and they focus on inclusive growth. I like what I see specific to the manufacturing sector as well as the job creation, because there is a clear agenda to boost manufacturing, whether it's via capex, whether it's by boosting demand. So that is something I like. Also, I think there was a clear linkage between the survey as well as what we saw in the budget today, right? For example, the growth was pegged at 7 versus a larger number that we earlier predicted. So you see the fiscal prudence, right? And there's not just a commitment for this year, there's also a glide path for the next year. Similarly, right, there was a call out on challenges in job creation. We see that focus on, support to MSMEs, employee, linked incentives, specific support to first-time workers in the formal sector. So I think it's a well-crafted one. There will be chatter, so there's always chatter on the investing side, on the capital gains side. But I think that apart, I would say it's a good focused budget.
Thanks, Meeta. Rajesh, if you could share your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I think broadly, according to me, the right word for the budget is more a consistent budget, because I think India definitely provides, like, India has a couple of levers which really which really adds to the overall growth of the country, right? More from a perspective of manufacturing and phones, people like India has done well. The entire concept of you build roads development sort of follows, right? India has done well there. I think broadly there's a follow through on most of the strategies, and which is good, consistent. And I think most of the parameters on fiscal budget, inflation on like food related items, right? Let's say that's being kept, I think, about 3.1 or 3.9%. I think all of those are pretty good and consistent. And I think consistently compounding like this probably over a good time period will ensure we get to where we need to get to. I was probably expecting a bit more going aggressive on the development of roads, etc. This government has done really well the last 10 years in the roads infrastructure, and that has typically also followed with, I mean, you've always seen that when road building is at a very high pace, the GDP growth also happens commensurate to that. So I think wanted to probably see if government takes more ambitious goals on that side. I didn't see any very different mention out there. I think would love to really look at what NHI plans really are more in granular detail. But yeah, and I think the rest of the things where things are a bit pinching are probably just to make the budget happen, and it's part of life. So I think those are probably that's more minor noise. People will probably forget it in a couple of weeks. So yeah.
Awesome. And Sandhya, would love to hear your thoughts, please.
It's a growth-focused budget. There is fiscal progress. There is employment focus. There is agriculture focus. Infrastructure focus continues. Like Rajesh was saying, it isn't loudly shouting, but it is still there. The piece that I like is the simplification focus and the intent to take a partnership or a participative approach with the industry. It's not that the government alone has to solve it. When we come together and solve problems together, the entire measures around employment have a participative approach with the industry. Of course, there are misses like always, but I think we'll do enough decoding on that over the course of the evening and the next several days. Overall, I think it's a good budget.
Thanks, Sandhya. And Amit, I know it's hard to come in last, but I'd love to get your opening thoughts too.
So one thing I'm quite happy, I echo with what everyone mentioned, like easier would have been in post this election result to dole out a lot of freebies. But I think they've stuck to focusing on long-term structural changes, focusing on skill development. MSMEs have a lot of focus where they're sort of going to help companies raise money without guarantees, etc. So those things, and also, of course, formalization of employment and the entire manufacturing sector, which will help in improving India's standing, and also that should result in more investments, I would think.
Sure. Thanks, Amit. Ashish, I'm going to come back to you. You talked about investors coming into emerging markets to make gains, and as someone representing a large international investor, do you think the budget sort of makes it easier for you to pitch the India story to your investors?
See, budget does make it easy to pitch for a very simple thing is, see, what do investors look for? They look for policy continuity, economic, stability, political continuity. Because, our pitch is very simple. Today, look at every sovereign, right? If you open a global map and you simply say, which are the areas you invest in where you can deploy 100, 150, $200 billion, right? I think there are very few areas in which they can continuously invest that kind of capital. That's point number one. So that pitch remains solid. Nothing changes. There are in fact, it opens up, for not just PVC investments on the tech side, but also on the infra side, investments on, several fronts, right? Building ports to building roads to building, commercial real estate to whatnot, right? So a lot of opportunities open. And as I said, I don't think investors really look at, you ask anybody, right? The capital gains has increased from 10% to 12%. Will you come to a market? Of course, they'll come to a market like India. That's not going to dissuade them, right? And you look at the public markets also today. It fell. Of course, there's a knee-jerk reaction, and then after that, people are, overall, and they'll absorb this, right? And I think they'll move on with it. And it's just a couple of days here and there that they'll be chatting. And after that, people are going to go about live their lives. So I don't think investors really care, would base their decision on that 2.5% increasing, not increasing. A very interesting thing that has happened is you brought the private investment, which is unlisted, at par to the listed, which is a very interesting thing because, I think that makes it very, that makes private investments more attractive. Exits also via secondary mechanisms more attractive. And as I said, that encourages FDI. So I think you've done that kind of rationalization. I think so. It's a very positive step. In fact, I didn't know about it until, I just had a couple of chats with few people. I spoke to Amit also that bringing that part, that is a request from the industry for quite some time. I think it's a very, very positive step for private investments. And the other one is the angel tax, right? I think the removal of that angel tax thing is again a positive thing. So I think long-term FDI capital is going to be excited about India. So it remains excited.
Yeah, we'll talk more on angel tax, Ashish, thanks for that. But I think in addition to the rate parity on listed, unlisted, there's also a long-standing demand of rate parity now between non-resident and resident investors, right? So earlier, non-residents had a lower tax rate on long-term unlisted, and residents were paying higher. Now it's 12.5% for everyone. So I think a somewhat philosophical change, mostly for the good, of course, as tax experts, we keep reading the fine print, and there are a lot of not so good points, but we'll come to that. Gaurav, just sort of getting you in, what were you expecting from an e-commerce and retail perspective in the budget, and how far do you think the expectations of those sectors have been met, considering you now have a very formidable presence as BlueStone?
Yeah, so I think in general, the government continues the reforms at a broader level, and that positively impacts the e-commerce and retail sector in general. I think our sectors naturally benefit from strong economic movement, increased skilling, and employment generation. So I think, and all that actually increases the consumer base who are happy shopping online and through the modern retail. So I think in general that's good, and I think the TDS reduction from 1% to 0.1% has also been a positive impact. It significantly helps the cash flows for almost all the e-commerce sectors. Specifically to our sector, I think the custom duty reduction on gold and silver is going to increase the demand again, and the demand was in general soft in the last quarter because of the increase in gold rate. So and I think we being a PE and VC-backed company, the angel tax reduction actually also positively helps us in some of the actions and the corporate actions that we are undertaking right now. So overall, I think a positive positive move for the sector.
Sure. Mayank, I'm just going to bring you in to maybe talk about this angel tax point in a little more detail. As it was being announced in the speech, we were all waiting to see what googlies will be there in the fine print. And, I think no one expected it to be just a carte blanche, clean, no more angel tax. In a lighter vein, all of us at Aeka were saying that, every structuring that we do, we spend 90% around this one section and subsection. So we were saying that we'll need to find something else now to spend our time on. So Mayank would love to, bring you in. I mean, obviously, as a leading PEVC investor, it's obviously a big relief. But more than that, how much of it is symbolic to say that, the government is listening, and therefore, if there are some real pain points, things will change in the country?
Yeah, so Abhishek, I think overall, over a period of time, government is, consistently simplifying the policies. At least our industry did not had huge number of asks. Angel tax, of course, was one of the key asks, and very pleasant to see, right, this just got deleted, as you rightly said, without any whims and fancies. So that came out as a very positive move, that government is here to hear and address the feedback. Overall, I think the government FM also announced a few more steps for which details are still awaited. She did talk about they will simplify FDI and ODI process. Further simplification will be done. A VST scheme will be done. So I think there's a lot of other stuff which government is trying to acknowledge. I think announcement around 1,000 crores for space economy and creation of a VC fund, for space. I think those are very, very positive signs. And I think this long-term capital gain, while of course we can keep debating, but overall theme of just simplifying, getting resident, non-resident together, I think that sends a very positive sign to both domestic investors as well as global investors. And given now it's everything is at 12.5%, I think that just removes a lot of arbitrage, and it just makes life simpler for everybody. So overall, pretty happy. I think the best thing is to remain consistent. Of course, as industry, we will keep on looking for consistency in positions, and not just at a policy level, but also on the ground execution during assessments and appeals. But overall, I think thematically, I think there's definitely a lot of positive signals which has come out of it. And it's unprecedented that the industry demands has been accepted in 100%. So kudos to the government.
Oh, absolutely, Mayank. Meeta, just coming in on manufacturing job growth, I know we spoke briefly on the employment-linked incentive narrative that's come into this budget. As someone who's sort of active into large-scale manufacturing and job creation, do you think there's finally enough focus on these two relevant aspects?
Yeah, so never enough, Abhishek, but I think there's a good amount of focus as well as initiatives that we see. So specifically to manufacturing, right? Overall macro environment, whether we look at the 11 lakh crore of capex for FY25, any sort of infrastructure development, fiscal support to infrastructure projects always boosts the manufacturing side. There's also the significant push that we are seeing towards the financial health and borrowing ability for MSMEs. I think purchase of machinery, equipment without collateral, that's something that goes to help the entire ecosystem, if not directly large-scale manufacturing, but it helps us develop the requisite ecosystem as well. Obviously, there are sector-specific measures on jewelry, e-commerce, mobile phones, tourism, the industrial parks that have been announced. So on a macro level, as well as sectoral, specific initiatives, I think there's focus on manufacturing. That also reflects on the employment and the job creation side. So I think the 3 schemes launched, the 1 crore apprenticeship scheme, the initiatives for the first-time workers who are coming into the formal sector, as well as the skilling program, which I think aims to create about 20 lakh youth over 5 years via industry-designed courses. I think those are great initiatives which will go towards boosting all kinds of manufacturing, and that is something which is well appreciated.
Great. Rajesh, I want to bring you in sort of as a natural extension from where Meeta left off. Logistics in India has always been seen as being full of bottlenecks. Where do you think this budget takes that story? Is there enough attention being given to modernize logistics? Different modes of logistics, not just roads. Where do you see that whole development chapter progressing to?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. In the context of logistics, right, I think government always has recognized that logistics is a very broken, unorganized, fragmented kind of a sector, and has typically tried to regulate it, or let's say design rules in such a way that it doesn't have to go to all these small fragmented players. It typically works with the end parties, right? So I think that they have consistent, they've been consistent in this budget as well. There's nothing which detrimentally impacts anything in the logistics sector. And I think that should be probably the role the government should play, that try to just govern few things and leave the rest of the things for industry to play out. Government believes a lot in sort of macro top-down policies from a logistics standpoint, which is what they launched the National Logistics Policy last year. This year, there is very less chatter about really what they would want to do. As I was mentioning before, I would love to see the growth rate in the building of roads increase. Second is whatever has been planned under the National Logistics Policy in terms of infrastructural debottleneck at the ports level, a lot of infrastructure like revamp, across the highways, etc. All of that, if naturally follows through whatever plan they built out, because the plan they built out was a 5-year plan. If that flows through, it will be like really great. And the only point which I would want to say and my point is with that logistics in India is actually pretty much bottlenecked at a truck operator level in terms of what he does, how he executes his business. And the entire digital public infrastructure which government is building is also bringing them into fold. So a lot of good impact is happening there. So that's indirect impact in the logistics sector as well, side. So I would say less chatter, but I think industry is pretty fragmented, so very tough to do a lot of things. The previously created strategy, if we can follow through and execute well, I think that will be great.
Sure, Rajesh. Sandhya, on healthcare, I think we all agree that innovation is vital for improving, public health outcomes. And, while there was some duty reductions on cancer medication and so on, do you overall think there's enough innovation, funding, and other incentives to truly make healthcare available and accessible to everyone?
I think we need to start this discussion with some context setting on why we have no other choice. Now, India lags major economies in terms of healthcare spending. If you take data of inflation, India has the highest healthcare inflation in the world in the past years. And India has the highest chronic disease burden with NCDs at 58% and second largest diabetic population, many untreated. We have 1.2 beds per 1,000 people versus WHO recommendation of 5. So, and if you look at it from the affordability point of view, there has been no change in the healthcare allocation in the recent budget, which means that you don't have more money to throw at the problem. So the only way you can disrupt this is through innovation, and coming from Narayana, which is like considered to be pioneer in healthcare innovation, I can say with conviction that's the only way. Now, coming to our economy per se, I think healthcare innovation in India is like about 30 billion opportunity today. However, it's completely dominated by pharma and health tech. And many of it just export focused. Biotech, medtech is nascent. We are not there yet that we can make a real difference to the affordability or accessibility for healthcare today. Take medtech, for example. Indian medical device market 11 billion, but 80% of the medical devices that India uses is imported, which means that we are very, very heavily dependent on foreign suppliers, especially for high-end care like cancer diagnostics, medical imaging, ultrasound scans, etc. There's hardly any innovation happening here. Look at the skill set. India has a very strong research institution base. Things, universities like IIT, AIIMS, etc., have a very strong talent base. So, which means the players for healthcare innovation are there, the ability is there. What we have is insufficient funding, lack of focus, regulatory hurdles, infrastructure gap. It doesn't come together. I can't directly read from the budget what we're doing about it, but what I really like about it is the allocation to research. at a very broad level. As we go through the fine print, we need to see how some of this can be channelized towards greater investment in research for health tech, for biotech, medtech, and of course pharma. But pharma, I think, is very, very well disrupted already. So I'm not able to read it yet that we have it there, but we have to see how this takes shape.
Thanks, Sandhya. Thanks for the very thoughtful and detailed response. Fully agree with you. Jayashree, if I can bring you in, and before I ask you about sustainability, how did you all at the firm celebrate the abolition of angel tax?
Totally welcome. It's actually a relief more than anything else.
Now, so coming to sustainability and ESG, I know as a firm you all have a lot of emphasis on that. At least from my perspective, the budget didn't, at least from a sort of speech and messaging perspective, perhaps not enough was said. What do you think we need to do so that businesses at the grassroots, adopt more sustainable practices and development is truly going in the direction it should?
Yeah. So I'll start with what are the expectations we had from the budget on sustainability. The expectation was a robust commitment to green infrastructure and sustainable development. We expected investments to prioritize renewable energy, clean fuels, sustainable transportation, research, paving the way for a net zero future by 2070, which has been the target. The government of India is working towards its vision of Viksit Bharat by 2047, which encompasses economic development, good governance, environmental sustainability, etc. The interim budget had set a strong foundation by emphasizing on renewable energy and green initiatives. Now, from what I picked up, this was between all your marathon meetings and travel. You're trying to also listen to what the finance minister is saying, and I may have missed a few things. One was, I'll come on sustainable business practices, but one was, to bring out a policy on appropriate energy transition pathways, which balances the imperatives of employment growth and environment sustainability. The finance minister launched the PM Surya Ghar Multi Bijli Yojana in the budget, installing solar panels in 1 crore households for 300 units of free electricity. Solar energy plays a crucial role in India's aspirations to generate 500 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030. That's the target it has set. And this is very important for reducing dependence on fossil fuels. Now, there was also a mention of supporting pump storage projects, which will be brought to provide round-the-clock energy supply. There was a mention of NTPC and BHEL setting up 800 megawatt supercritical thermal power with higher efficiency. Now, then additionally, investments in nuclear research and development, along with the climate finance for hard-to-abate industries. That also bolsters this well-rounded strategy. The R&D funding announced in the interim budget will be made available for nuclear research. Now, I didn't see any mention of any measures or provisions, and maybe I have missed it, to boost EV adoption in the country. And though there was a mention of fully 25 critical minerals being fully exempt from custom duty, lithium being one of those, which will help lower the manufacturing cost of batteries. We could have done, honestly, some more incentives could have come up in across industry for encouraging businesses to adopt sustainable practices. Something could have been done on the the government sector, which is your government hospitals, government schools, to help adopt sustainable practices, as well as I didn't see anything being mentioned on waste management as well. So there is, more things that one would have expected from the budget on these.
No, thanks, Jayashree. Amit, I'm going to bring you in on tax. Tax obviously is center stage to any budget. Just sort of your 3 or 4 key tax changes, and I just wanted your perspective on the change around buyback tax. Is it really positive for the government to keep flip-flopping between whether they want to tax the shareholder or whether they want the company to pay tax? We've seen that happen on dividends, and now we're seeing it play out on buyback. So it would be great to get your perspective.
Sure, Abhishek. This buyback tax and dividend tax have always have been a contentious concern from a government standpoint. They keep flipping back and forth because historically buyback used to be taxed in the hands of shareholder as capital gain. And because of that treaty exemption, everyone used to claim, and repatriation used to be tax-free from India. To plug that gap or loophole, then they introduced this buyback tax, putting the onus on the company so that the treaty benefit won't can't be taken. Then over a period of time, they realized most of the listed companies, which historically never used to do buyback, latching on to this buyback because from a promoter standpoint, it will give us a tax advantage of about 12-13% on a net basis, which again they've got to sort of plug this. But unfortunately, now they've turned buyback on par with dividend payment. Because had it been at least capital gain, it's understandable that you are essentially selling the shares for that matter. So it's like we've seen three different treatments in the last 5-6 years. And this leaves with a lot of open issues like what happens to the loss? Can we do a buyback? Historically, it has always been if I have profits, then deemed dividend implications would come. Now, in a scenario where we are not having any profits in a company, still a deemed dividend provisions will apply. So it is much, I think it should have been a little more thought through approach. And again, buybacks are used largely by listed companies. There could have been possibly some more time they should have left or come out with a better treatment on this buyback of shares. And couple more tax points I'd like to touch upon is angel tax being removed is a welcome step, which we discussed. They've also brought in a provision, or while many cases angel tax has not been an issue where you raise money from alternate investment funds in India. Those sort of cases, the department has been challenging on the source of funds. Either you catch them and catch the startups in the source of funds. If they are not liable to angel tax, then instead of trying to tax a premium or this excess fair value, they tax the entire consideration. One good thing is they have brought about this exception only in respect of IFSC related funds. Maybe there should be some bit of push to include that particular exception on the source of funds declaration to a larger base of investors so that you don't have this issue at a ground level where at the assessing officer level, there's always going to be a push and pull in the sense like whatever data we give, many funds would not want to share the details of their LPs. And that not sharing itself is seen as something suspicious where a lot of additions have been happening. So maybe some thought on that would have been good as my take. And of course, there are few other points in the tax like STT being increased, which is again to reduce the overall activity in the F&O markets, etc. So overall, like a lot of good things, but this buyback tax should have been possibly thought through a little better.
Yeah, Amit, in fact, your point on how the treaty was being taken advantage of when buyback used to be taxed as capital gains. Once again, bringing it as dividends would effectively mean several non-residents will get the benefit of lower rates under tax treaties. So, my view is that we may even see a rollback or a modification of this between now and the final passage, because clearly there are a lot of gaps on this front. Sandhya, I'm just going to stay with tax and bring you in. I know you are one of the unique CFOs who track tax policy very closely. What is your perspective of the one hit and the one big miss from a tax perspective in this budget?
Actually, on tax is a very long answer, but then I think the hit for me is the focus on simplification, the proposal to relook at income tax, the proposal to relook at customs duty, dropping of angel tax. The simplification is good. The misses for me, I think, are at three levels. As a healthcare CFO, I would have expected that because it's a very essential service and lack of input credit does increase the cost of service. We spoke about medical equipment. Customs duty is a burden. So I thought there would have been some action in that space. We will still see what happens in customs duty. There's not enough to bring down the landed cost of healthcare. So as a CFO, I'm not. I would expect a little more. At a personal level, nudging progressively to a simpler tax regime is good, but I do worry that this entire move around capital gains will is inside the parallel economy. And so to that extent, how that is going to pan out, and for salaried class, it's a big thing. And finally, as a chartered accountant, I think while there is so much intent to simplify, the complexity is so mammoth, we will continue to be gainfully employed. So that's what would be my hits and misses.
No, thanks, Sandhya. I'm just going to come back a little bit to the consumption story in India, and there's been a back and forth on whether that growth has been strong enough. Meeta, Gaurav, Rajesh, you all touch the Indian consumption story in different ways. Just wondering what your perspectives are on what's causing the growth to be wavering, and has the budget done enough? Meeta, if you can go first, followed by Gaurav and Rajesh.
So I think there's a reasonable push that's been given in this budget, whether it's via increased focus or specific outlay for agriculture reforms, employment generation, there's capex on infrastructure, urban housing. So say if I take just the direct impact, right? I was reading that the changes in income taxes mean that there is about 17,500 rupees extra with every person. Assuming that a significant kitty out of that goes into consumption, that's a fair enough boost and should help demand. On the indirect side, also sector specific, right, like social sector spending, tourism promotion, that should help generate higher demand and consumption. And specifically, I think the outlay for rural development of about, I think, 2.7 lakh crores, as well as the focus on the road connectivity projects. From a FMCG perspective, I think they help improve market access, help improve distribution networks, and thus the reach to the rural areas. For me specifically, I think as in the beer or the alcobev industry, we are excited about and positive about the employment generation and skilling initiatives. So interesting fact is India adds about 1.1 times of Australia's population every year to the legal drinking age, right? And as we have more and more such people, coming into formal workforce with the right disposable incomes, we are really hopeful that moderate and responsible drinking to that extent will take a boost in terms of demand. So I'm hopeful.
Awesome. And Gaurav, your perspective on the consumption story and what can be done to boost it a little more. Gaurav, you're on mute.
Yeah, so I think there are multiple vectors to it. So there's urban versus rural and unorganized versus organized, etc. So I think few of the hello.
All good.
Yeah, so I think So I think few of the underlying changes that have been happening, which is moved from unorganized to organized, that is only gaining even more momentum. And I think with more money in people's hands, with reduced tax, with more money in people's hands, with more people actually moving into formal workforce, it's only going to give more and more support to the modern retail. I think economic survey also points that almost 30 to 35% of the overall retail will move to modern retail and e-commerce by around 2030, I think. So I think in general, the organized sectors, in general, the branded sectors, and those two, and the ones which are actually in the premium segment are going to grow well over the years.
And Rajesh, how are you?
One more thing, Abhishek. Abhishek, I'll have to leave by 7, so I'll just informing you now.
That's fine, Gaurav. We plan to end by then. Yes, Rajesh, just your perspectives on the consumption story.
Yeah, so I think as I was mentioning before, right? I think trucks in India are again like we keep looking at movement of trucks in the country on a monthly basis, on a continuous basis, and we have sufficiently large population there to look at really how the volume movement is happening. Again, like clearly it's synonymous to what people have been talking about, right? Let's say on a year-on-year basis, the intensity of the distance which a truck travels largely appears a bit muted from a perspective, from a growth perspective. So obviously there is like slight, I would say sluggish, I would say growth in terms of the absolute movement of tonnage in the country, and this tonnage is across agri, minerals, metals, etc. So I think that concern is valid and sort of also is seen in our data as well. But I think there I would say that largely the budgets across the years have more, been built around the muscle of India, which I think, regardless of any, budget being created by, a government A, government B, right? I think still holds good. And I think I believe in that. And I think whatever all of these changes are largely a pinch here or there, I think nothing really materially would change. And neither the government has, without continuing to, execute with the fiscal prudence, if the government tries to swing here or there, I think consistency will be lost. So I think I would say there is sluggishness, but I think consistency is the right thing, because some of this is also a bit of cyclicality and things fall in place in a sort of a midterm. So a consistent compounding for a good 2 decade scenario, I think that's the right strategy, is always been my belief over the years. Yeah.
Light away on what you said, Rajesh, that budgets can be only that different. I was reading that two different opposition leaders, one of them said this is a really terrible budget, and then another one said it seems like a copy of a UPA budget. So that just shows that even to criticize, there are only that many things you can say. I know even to praise a budget, there are only that many things one can say. Just moving a little bit back into the financial services zone, Jayashree, just coming into Gift City, and I know you all have again been pioneers in that. There were a few changes. Amit talked about one. There are a few others where incentives have been given to certain kind of funds in Gift City, to financing companies in Gift City. So do you now think there's enough momentum around Gift and it's become mainstream, or are people still a little bit on the fences waiting and watching?
So, so in terms of some statistics, more than about 200 companies have established their presence in Gift City, including 9 banking units and 25 insurance companies and several brokerage and financial service providers. It has attracted a number of residents. There's a housing population of whatever 15-20,000 people, and it is expected to grow. The economic survey revealed that the banking sector in Gift City is evolving rapidly, featuring a mix of domestic and foreign banks. So notably, the transactions that were once processed through the international financial centers as Singapore, etc., are now being conducted through Gift IFSC. The challenges do exist. I'll come to what has been covered in the budget, but attracting and retaining talent continues to be a challenge. There's a need to build schools, hospitals for the growing population, improving connectivity with other cities and within the city as well. Also, you currently have to have approvals from SEZ separately and with IFSCA. Despite all the challenges, I think Gift City is gradually becoming a gateway for global capital and financial services for the economy. The authority is also fairly proactive, and they really try to attract businesses in setting up their presence in Gift. And as this evolves into a globally recognized international financial center, measures should be announced even further to facilitate a more open, transparent, and a vibrant capital flow framework. In the budget, as it was already mentioned also, one was retail schemes and ETFs in IFSC will enjoy tax exemptions, and I'm sure I've missed a few. Then it's also proposed to exempt certain income of core settlement guarantee fund, which are set up in IFSC, also to exclude the applicability of Section 94B to certain finance companies which are located here. Also, it is proposed that where a venture capital fund located in IFSC extends a loan or other amounts to an SSC, it no longer will be called upon to explain the source of funds, etc. So I think, there is still some amount of skepticism, but I think steps are being taken to make it mainstream.
Thanks, Jayashree. I've always been a proponent saying, why should Gift be tagged to a physical location? Why can't India be a gift country? But I guess that's a debate for another day. Actually, just bringing you in terms of I know you're an equity investor, but just from a credit perspective, do you think there's enough being done to increase credit offtake for businesses, make it more accessible? There's also a little bit of a view that the way unlisted bonds have now gotten to be taxed is going to make it even harder. So just your perspective, Ashish, from a credit perspective, particularly for early stage companies that don't have strong collaterals to provide.
See, at least nothing on the venture side that I think, in this budget that I have seen, at least I have not seen the fine print yet. But I think on the MSME side, which was hard hit by COVID, I think the Mudra loans and the MSME scheme that they're trying to do is pretty good. COVID, Demon, I think these are two things that really has, shaken that space and sector. And, you have to get that sector back on track. That is linked to rural consumption, that is linked to, the mass consumption. So I think we saw that. I think, I think the pilot with the Mudra loan, etc., has worked out really well. So I think that's probably one thing that I can talk that was encapsulated in budget. But an overall view in terms of taking even what was mentioned in the economic survey and comments by the governor a few days back, and the data around that mutual fund money is the people are moving the money from FD to mutual fund. See, I think despite all of that, I think what we see, given our exposure to the portfolio, the credit growth remains strong. The underwriting is far more, cleaner because of, the entire fintech ecosystem being available now, right? It is far more easier for you to do. One very interesting thing, if I have to also talk about in the budget, I think is the digitization of the land records and all. Now that makes it very, operationally, again, I'm just saying, but this is something that when we used to underwrite any housing finance company, the OPEX cost is very high, but the moment you move towards digitized records, it becomes easier for you to sort of, verify those titles. It does bring your OPEX cost down in some sense. So we see that some of these things will work in the positive direction. So directionally, we are doing good. Demand is there. In fact, the government is like, I hope this money is not being used for speculative trading or whatnot, etc. So they've been telling most of the lenders to go slow, but I think the demand is very much there. Structurally, we are pretty solid. And I think we are in a good, the credit offtake is I think we're very comfortable with that. And I think that is where everybody is betting on. So
Okay.
no.
No, good to hear that, Ashish. Amit, if you can just take us through the changes on reopening of assessments. I think that's been a big concern for both domestic and international investors, that a tax matter never reaches certainty, and I think that's a big one. So, would love to hear your quick summary on that.
Sure, Abhishek. So one good thing is at least the period for reopening has been reduced from 10 years to 5 years, which at least like after the 5th year onwards, you can be rest assured that things are okay. And other notable change, because this reopening related sections have been overhauled in quick succession, because the last set of amendments were something like they wanted to put some responsibility on the tax department to ensure that there is transparency and no abuse of process of law of threatening to reopen where there is no information, etc. And it cast a lot of responsibility on the department to conduct inquiries, record the reasons properly, follow all the natural justice, etc. And this led to a lot of writ petitions being filed on behalf of the taxpayers, saying that the process has not been followed by the department. 7 days notice was required. You give 3-day notice. That itself becomes a matter for sort of holding up from a technical standpoint. And all the tax practitioners, what was overall happening was that whether the case had a merit or no, everyone used to sort of focus on the technical glitches in the process to sort of derail it. Now, in some sense, the department and the government has got wind of what is really happening. Now they have gone back to a little bit of taken a step back and reduce the responsibility and onus on the department. So therefore, at least a process can be looked at it from more from a merit-driven standpoint rather than a technical standpoint of derailing the process. So this, while one hand 10 to 5 years is a good thing. Now, one other argument, counter argument would be that department is no longer as responsible as what it would have been or should have been in the last 3 years or 2 years. So that's a little bit of a plus and a minus there, but at least 10 being reduced to 5 is a good thing, so that you at least have closure there, because many cases what happens is in a client location, client place, a lot of people would have moved, and you open a 80-year-old matter, then it's very hard to find papers. What do we give in terms of explanation, etc. That's a positive in my view.
I always say that we first have angel tax and then we celebrate its abolition. We have a 10-year window and then we celebrate it becoming to 5. So again, I wonder why we set our expectations so low. I'm just going to go back to each of you with a question and a quick sort of one-word response. Rajesh, I know you're well into the journey of becoming a listed company, but how big a deal is it that the tax rate of capital gains on unlisted shares has been almost halved for resident investors?
And people would be very happy. The unlisted entrepreneurs, I think, and also like the angel investors, VCs, I think everybody will really be happy because it's very fair. I mean, because yeah, very fair and very good, very welcoming. I mean, people would celebrate this. Yeah.
Great. Sandhya, the budget, does it meet the expectations of an Aam Aadmi?
I think that depends on who you define an Aam Aadmi as. But I think a lot of this, even if you look at the 9 priorities, etc., it takes a lot of political will. So it depends on the execution, and I think it's a work in progress. It will be a journey. I would say it is in the direction.
Gaurav, ESOP taxation remains unaddressed. How big a deal is that?
I think ESOP is one of the major tools all the startups and the companies use these days to retain the talent, to acquire and retain the talent. So I think I strongly feel that the ESOP taxation should be same as the taxation of equity shares. So I think it would have been good if it was addressed. Yeah.
Mayank, there was no mention of the Ghar Wapsi of startups. Is that a good thing, perhaps, that we don't get too much attention to it?
Yeah, I think we were all expecting some changes and some provisions for at least some select companies to list in India and who are headquartered in Singapore, US, and other places. I think it's a bit of a disappointment, but I think FM hands must be really full since she has promised to review the tax laws again and come back in 6 months. So we still have some hope. Maybe next time they'll introduce something.
Ashish, I was meaning to ask you that, do you think the 10 to 12.5 is going to deter investors? I think you already confirmed to me that it won't. So waiting for you to launch your next few funds and increase your allocation to Indian markets. Jayashree, your sort of biggest miss, very briefly, of this budget?
Not really a miss. I just thought that, given the substantial collection of, GST that we have had, I thought it was an opportunity for us to rationalize and simplify GST, which, I just thought could have been done.
And Meeta, time for us to have a big swig this evening?
We're always promoting good times. So if you're happy with the budget, cheers and sip. If you're not happy with the budget, take a swig and move on.
Awesome. Great. Pankaj, I want to bring you in. Thanks for putting all this together at the back end, and we'll have to sort of summarize and wind this up for us.
No, thanks, Abhishek. And in my belief, I think the budget does some walk the talk around our honorable Prime Minister vision of the Viksit Bharat and Atmanirbhar Bharat, right? And I think it's no longer a old India, right, where one of the key focuses of the budget used to be that what's there in the kitty for the non-resident investors, right? Bringing down the tax rate or some incentive for them to invest into India. And I think bringing the parity in the capital gains tax rate shows confidence that there's much in India for you to invest, and we don't need to incentivize you to come to India.
Awesome. So we're on the clock, Gaurav. We let you go. Thank you so much, Gaurav, Mayank, Meeta, Jayashree, Ashish, Rajesh, and Amit, and Pankaj. Thank you for sparing a precious hour in the evening. Very delighted to hear all your perspectives, and we'll be in touch. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Goodbye.